Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on Azure Big Data Analytic Platform on Azure. Before I begin today's webinar, I would like to give 2 more minutes for other participants to join. Please hold on for 2 more minutes. Let others join as well. Thanks. All right. So I think the time we waited helped a lot more people to join the session. So let me welcome you once again for the session that we have taken today. That's Azure Big Data Analytics Platform on Azure, and we are going to take a broader topic today. We have taken a broader topic that includes data lake analytics, data lake store, data factory, data catalog. So I've got a lot of slides to cover, and in the interest of time, let me quickly introduce myself and then move ahead. So my name is Ilyas, and I work as a Azure Solution Architect at 8K Miles. I also work for Microsoft as a platform seller. So with that, let me move ahead. I hope you're able to see the slide. Okay, so like I said in the beginning, today we're going to cover the Azure Data Lake services, which consists of multiple different services. But essentially, Azure Data Lake services consist of 2 key suite of components. That the first one is Azure Data Analytics. The second one is Azure Data Lake Store. The rest of the components or the services, the Azure Data Factory and Azure Data Catalog, although are not part of the Data Lake services, but I felt it makes sense for me to cover this topic as well into the broader topic because both the suite of services is also part of the big data offering of Microsoft Azure. So along with the Azure Data Lake services, you could also see the HDInsight service, right? So the major difference, if you look at the slide, it is very much visible. So the HDInsight is a cluster as a service, right? So for example, if you have got a MapReduce job, you can very well take the HDInsight service and then you can deploy, and because you own the entire server, the nodes and cluster, so you can very well go with the HDInsight as an offering on Azure. The rest of the 2 components, Azure Analytics and Store, is what we are going to get in detail in this particular webinar. And additionally, we will also talk about the Azure Data Factory and Catalog, right? So since we have taken a broader topic, I may not delve deep into all of these components because the basic motto of this particular webinar is to give a sneak peek preview of all these services. And if you're further interested in learning all these suite of services, I would definitely recommend you to go through the Azure documentation that comes along with the samples and things like that. And additionally, I have also planned to provide webinars service by service. So on an every month basis, we'll be covering one such service. Right? So if you look at all these services, you could see three value propositions. One is these services are targeted for any kind of data, be it structured data, non-structured data, semi-structured data. So these sort of services can process any kind of data, and all these services are enterprise focused, an enterprise ready solution that any businesses, organization, and enterprises can leverage and process their big data workload. And again, these services are targeted towards developers, right? So if you look at the landscape, the big data landscape of Microsoft, all of them are focused towards developers. Essentially, these services are provided as a platform, as a service offering. And what this means is developers, an IT guy or developer can quickly go ahead and push the data, process the data, and get the output in a matter of minutes without worrying about managing and maintaining, managing the clusters, the underneath clusters. All right. So Microsoft loves open source. You could have recently seen, Microsoft talking about openness and the adoption of open source in the Microsoft ecosystem. And there's a specific reason why I have included this particular slide into this topic. So the reason is this. The Microsoft Azure Data Lake Analytics and the Data Lake Store are essentially built on top of the open source, the Apache Yarn and Apache HDFS file system, right? So the reason is both the Yarn as well as HDFS file system has been adopted very much by the industry and the developers. And there are plenty of tools that works very, very well with the open source ecosystem, and it does a good job in processing massive, massive structured and non-structured data, right? And if you look at the compute side, the ADL analytics is built on top of the Yarn engine, right? So, and it also processes both the hive queries, the pick queries, and U-SQL. So the U-SQL language is a new language introduced in Microsoft for processing the big data workload. So we are going to get in detail in talking about the U-SQL language. Right. So now, how do we start with ADL analytics? So the first thing that you do is you log into Azure portal, and then you create Data Lake Analytics account. So it is currently in preview, so not all of us will get access to Azure Data Analytics. But then when you start creating ADL account, you will see a request for preview account, right? So once you put your name and the email, within 24 hours, you will get access to the Azure Data Lakes accounts for you. And once that is done, once you get access to the Azure Data Lake account, you can then go ahead and start pushing your data, and you can start using the querying language, that is U-SQL query, and then you can analyze the data. So that's how you get started with ADL analytics, right? So there are two important value propositions that we are going to talk about in the ADL Data Lake Analytics and the ADL Data Store. The first one, important stuff is, since it is focused towards developers, right? So it is pay per query, right? So you don't necessarily manage the underlying infrastructure node or the cluster. How do you scale up and things like that? So basically, when you create an analytics account, it's basically free, and both the store as well as analytics accounts are completely free. So you only pay for the number of queries that you run and how long you run and how many parallel threads you requested for, right? And similarly for the ADL store, you only pay for how much ever data that you store and how many input and output operations that you performed on the data lake store. Okay, so these are some of the key information that we have to understand about Azure Data Lake Analytics. So like I mentioned before, you only pay for per query and how many parallel threads that you requested for when you execute a particular query. And it essentially federates the query when you submit a job into Azure Data Lake Analytics. It is very much similar to Hadoop ecosystem where you execute a query and the query gets executed under multiple slave nodes or child nodes, and once the job is completed, all the data are then collected and then given back to the user. So the Azure Data Lake Analytics is very similar in terms of how it processes the process and executes the data, right? And it also introduced a new U-SQL language, which is nothing but a combination of the regular SQL server, the T-SQL, along with the power of the C#. So people who come from the SQL background or C# background may find this U-SQL as an easy to adopt language for processing your big data. And there's no limit in terms of scaling the query. For example, if you have a massive petabyte of data or terabytes of data, you can parallel process the data and you can complete the entire process within an hour or matter of minutes. And the data lake analytics is also attached to the ADL store, which means the data lake analytic itself does not store your data. So the data gets stored in the store, the store which is built on top of HDFS, and only the compute or the processing happens at the data lake analytics. Right? So the data lake analytics seamlessly integrates with all other stores are available in Azure. So as you could see, the data lake analytics integrates with Azure SQL Data Warehouse and SQL DB, blobs, and Azure Data Lake Store and DBs in Azure VM. Although you can see all of these, but if you log into Azure Data Lake Analytics at this moment, you would only be seeing Azure Data Lake Store and Azure Blob Storage. The rest of other sources, data sources are coming when the ADL is generally available, right? So I didn't mention that. So both ADL Analytics and ADL Data Store are currently under preview, right? It is not generally available. So you may see hiccups here and there. There might be error which you can't understand, but I think all these things will be perfected once the Azure Data Lake Analytics and the Azure Data Store goes generally available. Right? So both the Data Lake Analytics and the Data Lake Store are available in the new portal. It is not available in the old portal. So if you want to get access to the Data Lake Analytics and the Data Store, I would recommend accessing it from the new portal, right? And like I mentioned in the beginning, when you search for Data Lake Analytics, you may not get the access immediately. You have to raise the preview request, and the preview request gets accepted. And once it is accepted, then you can go ahead and access the service. So in the interest of time, I'm rushing through, but if you have got any question, please send in your question in the Q&A window. We will then answer all your questions towards the end of the webinar. Right? So like I mentioned, both Data Lake Analytics and the Data Lake Store are targeted to the developers, the greater C# audience or the SQL audience who have been working on relational data, right? So the data analytics store and the data lake analytics, essentially helps you to process any amount of data, any structure of data, right? And what this means is how, as a developer, I can take advantage of both the suite of services. So you can access data lake analytics and store using Visual Studio. So that's what I'm going to show you now. Just hold a moment. Let me share my screen. So before I get into Visual Studio, let me take you through the portal. All right. I hope you're able to see my screen now. Let me know if you can't see my screen. Okay, so I'm on my Azure subscription. So to create a new account, go to New and click on Azure Data Lake Analytics. You can find it here, or so here it is. You can click on this and create a new data lake analytics account. As I've got the preview access, it directly allows me to create one. Since you're going to create it for the first time, so you may not be able to see that create button in the first shot. So you'll be given with a small form where you need to request for a preview access, and then you'll be allowed to access the data lake analytics account and the store account. So let me close this and open my existing analytics account that I've created already, and it is currently running. So let me click on that. All right. So this is the portal experience for the Azure Data Lake service. So here you could see the settings of the account, where you can see the audit logs and the sample jobs. So one of the interesting part is you can get started with Azure Data Lake account by following the interactive tutorials, where you can find the sample data that is residing within your data lake account. Once you click on it, it will basically copy this content into your Azure Data Lake store, and then you can basically follow along and get started with Azure Data Lake. And here you can find a new job where you can execute your first hello world query, and you can find your data source. Here you can basically create a new data lake store, or you can find your existing data lake store. So here I'm choosing data lake store, and I'm choosing the select account, and I'm clicking on the select data store. So here I've already created two accounts. One is in East US. I mean, both the accounts are in East US2. So I can basically select this and click on add to add my data lake store account into the data lake analytics. And you can also find the jobs that I've executed already, and here you can find the Data Explorer. So the Data Explorer helps you to see all your store accounts, and you can also see the content that is stored in the store account. So here I got samples. The sample has got folders, folder structure, and within the folder I've got CSV files and TSV files and things like that. Right, so let me go ahead and go back to my slide. Stop the screen share for a moment. Okay, I hope this gave you a quick picture as to how you get started and what are the various components are there within the ADL account. All right. So we saw how you can submit a query using the Azure Data Lake account, and since it is developer focused, you will also be able to access the Azure Data Analytics using the various SDKs. At this moment, SDKs are available for U-SQL, and for management, you can access using .NET SDK, and Node.js SDK is also available, but both of them are coming under GA. Okay, so right from the beginning, I've been talking about U-SQL, right? So the new program that are developed for processing or querying the data lake analytics account. So what is U-SQL? U-SQL essentially is a new language built by Microsoft for processing big data workloads, and it is nothing but a combination of the T-SQL plus the C# expression for managing and processing or filtering and applying conditions on top of the big data that you have, right? And it can basically process any kind of data that includes structured data, unstructured or semi-structured data, and it also helps you to distribute the queries across multiple nodes of servers underneath the data lake analytic account, and basically process the data in all those servers and fetch the result after the process is done, and then gives you the final output, right? So let me quickly take you through the benefits, and then I'll take you through the first Hello World query on Visual Studio as well as in the portal experience, right? So the basic fundamental of the U-SQL is it basically derives all the keywords or the clauses from the SQL. For example, you could see the select, from, where, group by. So all of these are very similar, and it's basically derived from SQL. So you can apply the same in U-SQL, and you can also apply this in the relational metadata objects. And similarly, if you have any C# classes that is already returned, you can also bring those DLLs as is to process your big data queries using U-SQL, and you can also reuse those quotes as well. In case if you can't find a specific function in U-SQL, you can start writing your own C# code and basically integrate that in your U-SQL query. So we're going to see this example shortly. Right. So U-SQL distributed query, currently supports writing and reading data from Azure Data Lake Store, storage blobs and SQL database, and similarly data warehouse and Azure VM. But currently, as we are talking at this moment, you can only read and write to Azure Data Lake Store and storage blobs, but the rest of the service is still not enabled. I hope these will be enabled when the service will go on GA. Right? So this is a typical structure of a U-SQL query. You can find this very similar to our select star from employee kind of structure or a schema. Here on the top, you can see a row set here, right? So row set is basically a temp temp structure where you extract all the data from the source file, because this is more of a read-on, right? So it is not a data fetched from a structured schema. So we are actually reading the data, semi-structured, non-structured data. So we are basically extracting all the data from a TSV file, a tabular separated value file, and then we are holding that data in the row set. Right? And here you can also find we are applying a schema on read, and it is not schema on write, right? So this is one of the basic value proposition of Azure Data Lake, where it helps you to push and store all the data as it comes in whatever format and whatever schema that the data holds, and read it whenever you want, or apply schema when you read those data. So here I got a search log file that has come from the various VMs, and now I'm applying a schema on read and pulling those data and holding that data in the row set, right? The temporary data structure, and then I'm outputting the information into another CSV file. And here you can also see extractors. So extractors are special functions that help you to extract the data from a file that's stored either on Azure Data Lake Store or Azure Blob Storage. Okay, so now let me switch back to my Visual Studio. Let me know once you are able to see. Okay, so I'm on the Visual Studio. So here you can see I've created a new U-SQL application. You can also download the Data Lake tool for Visual Studio for both Visual Studio 2013 and 2015. I've already installed it. So you basically create a new project and click on Data Lake analytics application, and you'll get a solution like this, and you can then go ahead and start adding U-SQL script. So here I've basically created a query, the very similar query that we have saw in the previous slide. It basically extracts a file from a file stored in my samples folder, and it outputs the folder files into a TSV format in another folder, in the output folder, right? So I can basically go ahead and click on compile and run it, submit the script. So it will essentially help me choose the data lake account that I've got in my Azure, and I can also ask for a parallelism. So parallelism is nothing but how many unit or compute unit that you want for executing this particular query. So the more unit that you ask for, the more the money you pay, right? So and you can also set this priority. For example, you can say 1, which means the highest priority, right? And similarly, if you want the least priority, you can say 1,000, right? So once you submit, for the sake of demo, let me say 1 and click on submit. So what this essentially does is it is going to submit this data, the query, into my Data Lake Analytics account. So currently it is preparing, and once it prepares and compiles, the query will be sent to the queue state, and then it will run and finalize the query, right? And once it is finalized, as per my query, it will basically store the output data into my output folder, right? So this is currently running, but I have already executed the similar query, and this is how the vertexes look like. So this is how it executes. So basically, Azure Data Lake Analytic account splits the data and executes in multiple nodes. Basically, it's a cluster, and it executes in multiple servers for speeding up your execution. All right. Let me switch back. So hope you are able to see. So I think I did not push the play button. So I was actually showing this. So this is the query that I shown you in the previous slide, and I executed it. For executing it, you basically click on start, and okay, so I think it's already running. So here it is currently running, and that's why it is throwing me error. And here is the previously run script. So here you can see it has splitted the workload and executed on Azure Data Lake's account, and how much of time that you took it to complete the complete job, and how many seconds for compilation, queuing, and running. Right. So I think this gives you a better idea as to how you submit the query and how it gets executed in Azure Data Lake Analytics account. Let me stop this and go back to my slides again. Okay, then you may ask, how is it different from HDInsight and why Microsoft is coming up with a new suite of technology, right? So the basic difference is this. HDInsight, as I said in the beginning, is a cluster as a service. So if you have got projects already running using Hadoop cluster, and you have customized the Hadoop cluster heavily, or you have written a Pig script or HiveQL script, which you can't right now run with Azure Data Lake account, then you can very well go ahead with HDInsight. For example, if you have a very good reason why you want HDInsight, you can very well choose HDInsight and you can run your queries. Right? But this is a cluster as a service. You are responsible to stand up a cluster, run it, scale it, manage it, and patch it. On the other hand, ADL Data Lake Analytic service is a big data query as a service. Essentially is a PaaS that lets your developers to just execute query without worrying about the underlying infrastructure of the complete account, the data lake account. All you need to do is open your Visual Studio, execute a query, get the job done, right? And of course, you can also run Hive at this moment, but not PigQL, which is currently in the pipeline. Right? So this gives you a greater difference between HDInsight and ADL Analytics. So like I said, if you've got heavy customization of your cluster, or if you want to have the total control of the cluster, you want greater flexibility, and if you want to run complete ecosystem, Apache ecosystem of products like Spark, Storm, HBase, then HDInsight is the right service for you to run your big data workloads. On the other hand, if you're looking at simple and efficient, easy to adopt, without any learning curve for your C# and SQL guys, then you have to look at ADL Analytics suite of services. Okay, so I think we already looked at the demo of the Data Lake Analytics, but for the interest, probably I can copy the same script that we executed here, and we can execute the same in the Data Lake Analytics. Again, I'm sharing my screen. Just hold on for a moment. Okay. Hope you can see my screen where I'm showing my Data Lake account once again, and I'm going to submit. I'm going to submit a new job. So new job is essentially the query that you want to run, and I'm saying hello world. Hello world query, and the priority is again 1, which means I want more priority for in this query, and I'm taking 20 as a parallelism. So what this means is Azure will allocate more number of compute units for processing and completing this query. Right? So as you could see, the same kind of query that I'm executing here as well. So I'm extracting the data from the TSV file using the extractor function. And here I'm using extractor.tsv. You can also use CSV in case your file is comma separated value, but my file is the TSV file, so I'm using extractor.tsv file. And here I'm going ahead and submitting the job. So this may take a moment for it to complete. So what it does again is it is going to compile and prepare the query, and it will send it to the queue, and it will run it and finalize it. Then once it is finalized, you can see the input and output folder. Right? So in the interest of time, I'm going to close it, and we can either look at the past query that I have just executed from my Visual Studio, which is also completed. So the query that we just ran is currently under queue, but the previous query that we executed using Visual Studio have completed. And here you can also see the complete diagram. You can also click and see more information. It has used one vertex and it has completed within 15 seconds. So we are going to go deep into these vertexes and how it executes underneath in the upcoming webinars, but we are not going to go deep into it at this moment. All right. So let me close this and stop my screen sharing and go back to the slide. Okay, so far we have been talking about data lake analytic account. I think we spent more than half an hour on that. Now we'll quickly look at the data lake store and the rest of the components quickly. So the data lake store is again a service to store massive amount of structured, semi-structured, and structured data without any restrictions found in Azure block blobs, right? So you may ask why we need another store when we have Azure block blob where you can store any kind of files. Right, so we're going to look at the differences, but to give you a context of what this is, so it is basically a file system on top of HDFS for the cloud, and it is enterprise grade, and there is no limit in terms of scale, no limits in terms of how much you can store, and how much of petabytes or terabyte of file that you can terabytes of data that you can store in a single file, right? And this is optimized for analytics workload. So this is a major difference between the Azure block blob and the data lake store account, right? So these are some of the fundamentals again, and this is just like Azure block blob, 3 copies of the same data gets replicated within region or across region, and it's highly available, and it is unlimited storage, right? So for example, in block blob, you cannot store more than 500 TB of data, but in case if you've got petabytes of data, then Azure block blob is not the right fit. And we are planning to use Azure block blob for analytical workload, then you may not get the expected input output, right? In that case, you have to look at Azure Data Lake Store for analysis workload, right? And just like any other service, especially the storage services, Azure Data Lake Store is also enabled with or integrated with the AD, so you can restrict the users, you can set which users can access or can see which data stored in your Azure Data Lake Store, and it is also audited, logged, and managed, and all the data that you can store in Azure Data Lake Store account is also can be encrypted. And as you could see, the asterisk items is still not available, and it is expected to be available when the service goes GA. Right. So this is again a difference. Integration HDInsight, HortonWorks. It is integrated with HDInsight, HortonWorks, Cloudera, and it also best works with all the Apache ecosystem tools and services. Right. And it is also work with the Hadoop and Storm, Hive, Spark, and Hadoop various Hadoop distros and things like that. So this is again to give you a basic idea about how the HDFS store integrates with the rest of the big data processing engines and processing stores. Okay, so this is the slide that I want to stress on to give you basic information and the differences between the ADL store and blob storage, right? The scenarios on, again, is this is optimized for analytics, and this is general purpose block storage where you can put your images or PDF files or any kind of file that you can put in the blob storage, whereas the ADL store is optimized for analytical workloads, right? But in terms of the billing, both are same. You pay for how much ever data that you stored, and you also pay for the IO operation that you have done on both the stores, and this implements Web HDFS, and there is no Web HDFS involved in blob storage. And the rest of the things are both of them are integrated with Active Directory, and this uses access keys, and this is boxes style ACLs, and this blob storage uses access keys for authenticating your users. Right? And again, for ingress and egress, you can use the various services. Azure Data Lake Store is integrated with ADF, Azure Data Factory, that we are going to see shortly, and this is also integrated with Azure Import and Export services, and it also very well integrates with all the tools, including Azure Portal, PowerShell, Platform CLI, and things like that. So these are the various endpoints through which you can access the ADL store. Of course, you can access the ADL store using the Azure portal. You can also access ADL store using .NET SDKs, Node.js SDKs, and Python SDKs. So these are the various sources that can integrate with Azure Data Factory. That is what we are going to see shortly. All right. So to summarize, Azure Data Store, Azure Data Store is mainly for storing your analytical workload, and it is built on top of Web HDFS, and you can store large amount of data. Includes petabytes and terabytes of data, and that integrates seamlessly with the existing big data tools and service ecosystem, and it also integrates well with the rest of the services available in Azure. Right? So now let's look at Azure Data Factory and Azure Data Catalog. Right? So to give you an introduction about Azure Data Factory, so the Azure Data Factory is nothing but a ETL as service. So if you're coming from the SSIS background, and if you're coming from the SQL Server background, you will be able to understand what ETL is. ETL is basically extract, transform, and load, right? But in the existing the era where we used to fetch the data and then put the data into a schematic form, and then you basically query or transform it, and then you store the data into a warehouse like SQL Server or a Teradata and things like that. So, but the basic difference from the existing ETL tools with the Azure Data Factory is the Azure Data Factory differentiates into a different model. For example, so where in the existing SIS we used to do ETL, we extract the data, transform it, and load it. Here in Azure Data Factory, it does ELT instead of ETL. So what this means is it extracts, load, and finally it transforms. Right? So the difference is you don't really transform right in the beginning. You transform it later. Right? The thing is, you accept the data in whatever format that you have received from your customer, from any sources that you have, and keep it in the store, and you only transform it when you need it. Right? So this makes Azure Data Factory as extract, load, and finally transform when you want. Right? So to give you a little more context, so the Azure Data Factory helps you to orchestrate, create a pipeline, create a data movement between sources and output, and you can do basically any kind of transformation using the variety of tools that you have, including you can use U-SQL, or you can use high queries or pqueries to transform your data. But not just limited to whatever tool that I said. In fact, you can also use .NET or C# to apply the transformation. Right? So let me quickly show the Azure Data Factory in the Azure portal. Just hold on for a moment. Let me share my screen. Okay. Hope you're able to see my screen. I'm switching back to my portal. Okay, so unlike Azure Data Lake Store and Analytics, Azure Data Factory and Azure Data Catalog are on GA. It is currently available, so you will be able to go ahead and click on New and select Azure Data Lake Analytics. Sorry, Data Plus Analytics, and you can find Azure Data Catalog as well as the Azure Data Factory here, right? So you can basically give a name and select the subscription and put in the service into a resource group name and select the region. So at this moment, the data factory is available in selective regions, for example, North Europe and West US, and click on Azure Data Factory. So in the interest of time, I have already created an Azure Data Factory in my account. Here it is. Let me click on that. All right. So here is my account. Here you can see some of the actions. For example, author and deploy. Let me click on that. In the author and deploy, you can see the key activities. For example, linked services. Linked services basically linking your source and output of the data. For example, I have linked some of the files that is residing in Azure SQL, the data residing in SQL data, and I have also linked HDInsight linked services. Here you can find the information and the storage account, my blob storage, and the account key. You need not worry about the keys because it is morphed for you, and the data sets. Right, so where you got the data set. So the data set is coming again from the variety of sources. Some of these sources are coming from my Azure blob, and some of the files are coming from my Azure Data Store. Right, and here is your pipeline. So pipelines are the transformation activities where you transform data from one format to another, or you strip down your data and things like that. So you can do various kind of transformation on the pipeline. And similarly, the data gateways. In case if you want to fetch data from your on-premise SQL Server or Oracle, you can install the data gateway on your on-premise environment, and then you can connect your on-premise data stores into your data factory. Right. So in the interest of time, again, let me open my existing sample pipeline that I've created. I'm sorry, click on the diagram. So here you can see the complete pipeline. Here I'm taking an input that is stored in the Azure blob storage, and I'm doing an activity here. So that is called pipeline, and this pipeline, so if you're interested, double click on it, and you can also see the summary or the pipeline source itself, the code that actually works to transform your data, right? So this is the code that helps you to slice the data based on the year, month, date, and it is giving me some output. Right? Let me close it. So here you can see the complete diagram from the start, from the beginning, where it takes the input and it applies some transformation. Again, it gives me some output that is again merged with another metadata, and it transform the data, and again it creates an output. Right? So this is a complete diagram or the lineage where you can see the in one single pane of glass you can see the complete transformation happens. But you may be wondering how different it is from SSIS packages, because essentially SSIS also does the same ETL, right? But SSIS is more of an engine for processing your structured data, whereas the Azure Data Factory can do both structured data transformation as well as semi-structured and non-structured data, right? So that's a basic difference from SSIS and the Azure Data Factory. Okay. Okay, let me go back to my slide. Okay, so some of the key concepts we saw in the previous deck and my Azure portal. We saw the data set, which is essentially the data that is residing in your Azure blob storage or Azure data lake store account, and the linked service. The linked service is essentially the service that links your existing data sources, that is either coming from your data stores within Azure or data source that is coming from on-premise. And you can apply activities. The activities are nothing but transforming activity or a copy activity, and the pipeline. The pipeline is actually the thing that holds the transformation work, right? So these are some of the few concepts that you have to keep in mind while you're working with Azure Data Lake, Data Factory, right? So this gives you a complete picture, how the transformation happens and things like that. So it's not really visible. Let me see how I can maximize it. I don't think I can maximize it. Just hold on for a second. Okay, so I could not maximize it. Okay, I think you are able to see it. So it actually takes the raw data and then it processes it. The processing engine could either be a data lake analytics account, or it could also be your Hadoop cluster. In case if you have an existing Hadoop cluster that is HDInsight, you can very well use that as a compute engine, and then you can process the data. Or you can also ask Azure Data Factory to create on-demand HDI cluster to process your data. Again, for processing, you could use any of your familiar queries that includes HiQL or Pig or MapReduce or even custom code for the data movement as well as the processing of your data. Right? And the data stores again could be the existing data source that we talked about, or the data consumption could be anything. For example, you could also consume the data by your application or Power BI as a consumer you can think of. Okay, so we saw the demo as well. Okay, so the final piece of today's webinar is Azure Data Catalog. Okay, so Azure Data Catalog is essentially a metadata service that can help you to hold all the data service, the data source that your organization has. For example, have you ever wondered where a particular database is? How many Oracle servers have your data, or how many Excels has your important key data, right? So, as a BI guy, you may be wondering where these data are and where is it stored, which server has it, who owns it, who is the owner through which I can get access to this particular data, right? So all the organizations have a lot of amount of data, but it is in disparate place and it is owned by multiple people, and you may need to follow a approval policy to get access to those data. So what if there is a service that can help you to see all the data sources and the consumers of those data sources in single dashboard, on a single pane of glass? Can I see all those data sources? And if required, can I allow and request users to access those data? And similarly, can I restrict users who are currently using those data data sources, right? So the answer is the Azure Data Catalog. So this Azure Data Catalog is currently under GA. You can very well go ahead and use this service. The pricing also looks very, very easy and simple. For example, it provides you 50,000 entries for free, and later if you add, you may need to pay more. So, this service basically allows you to identify all the data sources that you have, and then create an inventory of those data sources, and allow your consumers to easily consume those data sources, So that's a use case of this particular Azure, service on Azure. So let me quickly take you through the demo. Let me know if you can't see it. Okay, here it is. I have already created one. I can click on, show this to you, but in case if you are trying to create new, click on create new, and again go to the data catalog, data plus analytics tab, line item, and then click on it and go to the data catalog, right? So you can name it and then start using your data catalog service, right? So here I have already created one. Let me click on that. Okay, so this is the tab where you can see your Azure data catalog, and this is provided in a separate portal, right? Unlike other service where all the services are integrated within the Ibiza portal, but Azure data catalog is offered in a separate portal. You can also access the Azure data catalog and then you can authenticate yourself, but you can also access it through this portal as well. So now I just clicked on it and it takes me through authentication. I think it is authenticated. We should shortly see the portal and the data sources that I've already added. So this is the portal experience where you can publish your data, and this is basically information on getting started and how you can store. Now click on publish data. So when you click on publish data, there are two options given to you. One is create manual entry, where you can add your data sources. For example, let's say you want to add, for example, your FTP, right? So you can put your FTP, the object type, whether it is a FTP home directory or a directory itself, and what is the authentication, Windows authentication or basic authentication, things like that. And similarly, you can also find all other data sources that are currently supported with Azure data catalog. For example, you can also include SAP HANA or Hive or Teradata, right? And so this is one way of manually entering your data catalog. The other option is launch application. So what this does is it downloads a tool. This is an exe file that you can download, and once you install it, it gives you an exe file where you can, one quick moment, launch application. You can download it, and once you install it, it helps you to find your data sources that is installed in your application, right? And through that, you can also find data sources that you have on your premise, as well as data sources available in your Azure storage or blob storage and things like that. So you can add many more services, right? Just give me a moment. Let me try to search the recently added item. Azure Data Catalog. Hope you are able to see my screen. It is launching the application. So using this particular service, so this is a client that can be installed on your desktop, and once it is installed, you can then authenticate yourself with Azure, and then you can basically give your Azure storage account using which you can link all the data sources that you have within your Azure Data Lake store or Azure Blob storage, right? So these are some of the recent assets that I added. I think I've deleted it. Fine. So the intent is to give you an idea as to how the Azure Data Lake Store and the catalog service, works. Right. So in the interest of time, let me try to wind up the session and go through some of the questions that you have posted on the window. Let me stop it and go back to my Q&A window. Okay, so there's a question from Sanjay asking about the difference between big data analytics and data lake. So the big data analytics is basically the data lake. I mean, it is vice versa. Azure provides in the name of big data analytics, which helps you to analyze any kind of data, the data stored in your Azure data lake store, right? So this is basically the name of the service offered in Azure. How can ADL automate tasks using PowerShell, right? How can ADL automate tasks using PowerShell? So you can access all the methods available in Azure Data Lake using PowerShell. You can go to the complete list of documentation, the syntax available for you to automate some of the process that you can do with Azure Data Lake. Yes, of course, you can all the syntaxes are available for PowerShell. You can go ahead and read it and execute it. U-SQL is handy with data lake only. Yes, at this moment, it is limited for data lake store at this moment, data lake analytics and data lake store, but I'm not sure about the vision of Microsoft, how they want U-SQL to go further. I mean, I'm not sure whether they want to bring the power of U-SQL with existing SSIS and SSRS features that are currently available on-premise. What is the volume of data in the file which you are currently processing? Right, so nice question. So the size of the file was only in KBs because it is just to show how you can query and how the analytics is currently processed using the Azure Data Lake account, but it is not to show the power or how much of time that it takes for processing GBs or petabytes of file. Of course, you're free to do all these experimentation using your Azure Data Lake account. How real-time analytics can be done by using Azure Data Lake Analytics. So at this moment, as far as I know, Azure Data Lake Analytic account is currently for batch processing. It is not for real-time processing, right? So for real-time processing, probably you have to look at HDInsight along with Storm and Spark clusters. Of course, you can also look at Azure Stream Analytics for processing your real-time data, but Azure Data Analytics at this moment mainly works with batch data. Again, I install Data Lake Analytics in my existing Azure setup running on my lab server. So the Data Lake Analytics is essentially a PaaS service that works within Azure. There's nothing like you can download a client and you can run it locally. Of course, you can use the Data Lake client within your Visual Studio for trying and experimenting the Azure Data Lake analytics within your Visual Studio, right? But it is the entire processing engine is actually sitting in Azure. You cannot bring those the cluster within your local environment. Right, so the Data Lake, the PowerPoint add-on is basically for you to try and experiment with the Data Lake Analytics. Do we need rich knowledge on .NET to work on Azure Big Data Analytics platform? Not required, right? So, see, one of the key reasons why Microsoft has brought in Azure Data Lake Analytics as the store is actually simplifying the learning curve that one has to go through. For example, if you're a .NET or C# or SQL developer, I mean, you may find it very hard for you to get into Hadoop cluster, or Hadoop programming, or Java programming, or Spark programming, or writing a HDInsight, right? So that's one of the reasons why Microsoft brought this server to simplify and help the existing Microsoft ecosystem and developers to make use of their existing C# and SQL knowledge for processing the big data workloads that the new generation of companies are bringing in, right? But of course, if you're a SQL guy, a typical SQL guy without C# knowledge, without a development knowledge, and similarly a C# guy without a SQL knowledge may find it little difficult. And you can't get away with it. You are expected to learn a bit of both and then go ahead with SQL data analytics and the store features. So Prabhakar has asked how to extract data from multiple files. Yes, of course, you can extract data from multiple files. I got an example for that as well, which I can show in the upcoming webinar, a detailed webinar on Azure Data Lake Store and Data Lake Analytics. Can ADL Analytics connect with DocumentDB? At this moment, no, and even I can't see this in the roadmap as well. But I think Microsoft will soon add this as a service within Azure Data Lake account. I mean, if you are interested, I would recommend you to go through the feedback forum of ADL Analytics and vote for this particular service so that Microsoft will consider adding this as a request for integrating DocumentDB with Azure Data Lake Analytics and Store. Can the Data Lake Analytics be integrated with any web application? Of course, yes. I mean, you can't integrate the Data Lake. I mean, of course, you can integrate the Data Lake Analytics REST API within your web application, and similarly, you can access the output files created by Data Lake Analytics within your web application. Yes, of course, you can do it. Is there any way to leverage Azure Data Factory for on-premise Hadoop solution? Yes, I believe. Yes, there is a solution where you can install Azure Data Factory, the gateway component within your on-premise, and I think you can definitely integrate with your existing Hadoop infrastructure investment on your premise with the Azure Data Factory on the Azure. Yes, of course you can do it. How could we use SSAS cubes in Azure Data Lake Analytics account, for which I don't have the answer, but I've noted it down. I can come back to you individually with this particular answer. All right, will be a data available in ADL store? Yes, as per my knowledge and the information provided by the ADL Analytics team from Redmond, hopefully this will be available in I believe in 6 months from now, maybe even before that. Will the data be available in data store even after data analytics shut down? Yes, of course, yes. So the Data Lake Analytics and the ADL Data Store are two different services. For example, if you have killed or shut down your ADL Analytics account, even then your data will be stored in the ADL Store. All right, I think I've answered almost all of your questions. In case if you have any more questions, please head to Stack Overflow, or you can also personally reach out to me. Unfortunately, I haven't left my contact information on this particular slide, but you can search my profile on LinkedIn by saying Ilyas and say Azure. You'll find my profile, and I would recommend you to get connected with me, and you can also ask question there. All right, thanks for joining, and thanks for being a patient attendee for the session. I look forward for a very detailed session in each of these topics that we talked about today, and look forward further events like this. Thank you so much for joining the session.